What's up? Welcome back to Lockdown Universe. Home of the bizarre, peculiar, unheard of stories of UFO legend and paranormal lore. Hope you're having a good day, taking care of yourself. Spiritually, emotionally, physically, every which way. Having some fun today, having some fun this way. Don't want to live another day without some joy in your life. That's right, we do it right here, lockdown for you. So, welcome back to Lockdown Universe, home of the bizarre, peculiar, and unheard of stories of UFO, legend, and paranormal lore. That's a great song, man. It's just like, I got this chillax station on, man. It's super chill. I love it. So anyway, really cool story coming out of the P&M website. Again, this happened in Hawaii, and there apparently was a entity. Again, this is really weird. There's a lot of gray, dark cloaked entities that look like Bruce Willis in Unbreakable. I did another podcast about that. But this happened in an Oahu, Hawaii apartment. And this is the title. It says, dark cloaked, glowing, red slanted eye entity. I don't like that. They use slanted eye in there, but I mean, that's the title of the thing. So I mean, maybe there's some need to put that in the story, maybe because there's different entities that have different eye sets. I don't know. So anyway, let's go to this. So this story was published. A Hawaiian youth is at home in his parents' apartment when he glimpses the dark cloaked, glowing, red-eyed figure walking past his bedroom doorway. Okay. So let's see what they have to say about this. Now, what's up with all this, right? It seems bizarre, but this is the story. I have never tried to contact someone before about this, he says, but here it goes. It's not a traditional alien story, but I'm interested in seeing if anyone else has seen what I did. Yeah, a lot of people have, brother. Don't worry. I was 7 or 8 years old. I lived in Oahu, in Hawaii. What? In the Salt Lake City area? I don't know if there's a Salt Lake City area in Oahu, but I trust that there is, which is located next to the base on that island. We lived in a very populated area in a 12-level apartment building, and that's pretty high. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. My parents' room was on the other side of the apartment. One night, I had a bad dream and got up in the middle of the night to sleep in my parents' bed. Only my dad was there. I don't remember where my mother was. At some point in the early hours, I had to get up and go to the bathroom. I wasn't scared. I was just sleepy. The bathroom was adjoined to the bedroom. As I walked out of the bathroom toward the bed, something caught the corner of my eye and caught my attention. I looked up and saw a figure in a dark cloak walking past the doorway. It saw me at the same time. We were both startled, and we just stared at each other for a moment. I was scared out of my mind. I couldn't move or scream. One thing that impressed me was how little it was. It was my height. At 7 or 8 years old, you got to imagine that's only going to be about 3.5, 4 feet maybe. It was wearing a dark cloak that covered its head, and it was clasped at the neck. Inside the cloak was it was pitch black inside the cloak, so much that it seemed unnatural. It had 2 large oval slanted, like typical red glowing eyes were all I could see. That's what he said. He says 2 large oval slanted eyes. So I'm assuming he means like the aliens, like the gray aliens have the slanted almonds. But he said they were red and glowing was all he could see. We stared at each other for a moment, Then it jumped out of view. I had no idea what I saw nor what to do. I was completely freaked out, and my dad was laying there asleep. So I did what most children do when they're scared. I laid down on the bed and pulled the covers over my head. It seemed like I might be imagining it as it happened, but I felt someone pushing down on the bed in a circle around me, and then lastly pushing on my pillow. I remembered everything very clearly, but I didn't tell anybody for a really long time. It never crossed my mind that it was an alien until much later. I thought it was some kind of demon. There are a lot of stories about evil little people in Hawaii. I've never heard that before. And I figured that's what I saw. But I met a lady who heard my story and told me about the Greys. And the fact that I was surprised and shocked is what I still can't get over. She said it was probably expecting me to be still in my bed and that it was there for my father. That's what she said. Well, I mean, that's speculation at best. I mean, there's no way she can know that. I mean, a lot of times, if it was an alien, they're coming for you early on, man. I mean, my encounters, if it was an alien encounter, happened when I was like 3 or 4, and probably has happened since. So, and many people have these issues, these abductions all throughout their life. I have not gone to hypnotic regression. I'm honestly a little freaked out to even go. And you might say, "Oh, come on, you lead lockdown universe. You got to go do it." Well, let's say you do find out, and you find out some pretty terrifying shit, and you bring it into the forefront of your consciousness. You might not want it anymore, right? And you might not be able to erase it anymore either. So you got to be careful of what you wish for. So for this kid, he remembered it. He's remembered it his whole life. But the weird thing it's not like at the Mothman where it's like 8 to 9 to 12 feet tall. It's not some dragon-like entity like they see at O'Hare Airport. It's not like some, huge entity that's even 6 feet tall. It is like 3 to 4 feet tall. What if it was like another child entity that was just dark, and lost or brought into some like dark afterlife life cult, just walking around with red eyes, or it was like an interdimensional alien with red eyes, it was just there to examine, just take a look, and maybe they was going to take some DNA, or it was a dark entity and it took on the height of this child because it didn't want to freak him out too much, and it wanted to kind of befriend him or have him not scream. There's a lot of theories as to why it would be that height, but I think it bears worthiness of noting that there's been this rash of entities that dress in gray, what appear to be ponchos or raincoats or some dark gray material, and and they're hooded. You don't hear a lot about gray aliens, the typical grays, wearing hoods. They just wear silver suits, that's it, that just blend into their body. This thing had red eyes. Grays don't have red eyes. So, and I was talking about in that previous podcast about that accident with that gray entity who was, looked like Bruce Willis in Unbreakable. Like all gray, dark, all gray tone in the shot. I mean, very bizarre, right? It's hard to find somebody in like perfect gray tone from head to toe, not dressed in a suit, but dressed in like a poncho, like, and shoes and pants and everything that fit this one gray tone. It's very bizarre. So when we talk about dark entities, typically they're pretty dark, like black dark. But some of these guys are dressed in gray. I'm just wondering if they're not a different entity altogether. Are they shapeshifters? Possibly. Especially in this case, maybe you just wanted to shapeshift down. Otherwise, you're talking about like an Ewok, heighted creature. The height of an Ewok. Except it's wearing a dark gray hoodie instead of a light brown hoodie. I love Ewoks too; they're great. But what happened in this case? Because what's really interesting is that there was no telepathic communication. The entity didn't really talk to him. It just stared at him, almost as if it was mute. I think that if it was a higher level being, it would have at least said, go to sleep. Or would have said something. Or would have said, don't worry, we're not here for you. Just relax, calm down. Or would have abducted them and taken them and, taken some DNA or whatever the case is. But it didn't do any of that. This one's kind of weird to me. Either he forgot, it made him forget with their technology, their frequency technology that we now know that even our own government has and governments around the world have, or this thing was like in a parallel dimension and it just wasn't able to communicate with him because it couldn't communicate with him if it was in a parallel dimension. It's just kind of like looking at him through the veil, But it doesn't sound like that's the case either, because it sounded like it was a very real thing, and then he felt like this pressure around him. And then there are these stories of these evil little people. Is that what he said? Evil little people? Evil little people in Hawaii, which I've never heard of. I guess I have to do some research on that. But have you ever heard of evil little people? My cousin lived in Hawaii. I never heard about that. I heard about Dog the Bounty Hunter. He lived in Hawaii. She sent me all these clippings of newspaper, clippings of Dog and stuff like that. Great, interesting stories about Dog the Bounty Hunter. Nothing wrong with that. But never really heard about evil little people. But every, area that has its own native people are going to have its own belief systems and its own history and its own spiritual history that's going to come out. So could these entities just be former natives that have passed on or have stuck with the island for some reason? Could they be some other entity from millions of years ago that just stuck here for millions and millions of years? See, the thing about us humans is that we just think, if we see an entity, it's got to be either an alien or a human. Well, what if it's another entity that was here before humans even walked the planet? What if it was the first experiment, or the second, or third, or the 15th experiment of bipedal creatures to walk the earth? And it's been here after it died, and it's been here for millions of years. But for it's kind of like in Beetlejuice when you walk outside and you come back in, and 6 hours have passed, but only like 30 seconds passed while you were out there. It could be one of those scenarios where this little guy's just been around for millennia and millennia, but it just feels like it's been a few hours. It's really interesting to think about. There's lots that we could hypothesize on here, but unfortunately we don't have any more info, and I don't want to hypothesize on some info that I don't have. But he did say that this thing did feel this. He felt a presence pushing down on his bed in a circle around him, and then lastly pushing on his pillow. It doesn't sound like it's evil. It didn't leave scratches on him like some of those evil entities. It didn't, it didn't leave bruises. It doesn't try to hurt him. It sounds like the damn thing tucked him into bed. Sounds like a nice entity. So who knows? Maybe it's a former family member. Maybe it's an ancestor. I don't know. But it doesn't sound like it's necessarily a negative entity, because if it was, it wouldn't have tucked him into bed. So anyway, let me know what you think. You ever been to Hawaii? You ever seen an evil little person? Most people love Hawaii. It's unfortunate. There's a lot of poverty there. But it's a beautiful place to live. So that's the story for tonight. Tuck yourself in. And if you feel an entity coming to tuck you in, well, hopefully that's all it's doing. Hopefully it's not taking the bed sheets off and abducting you and bringing you up into a spacecraft and putting needles into your belly, because nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. Unless you're giving me a Subway sandwich first and you take me on a date, don't be poking any needles in my belly. All right. I hope you guys have a great night. Take care of yourself spiritually, physically, and emotionally. I love you. Please share and follow and like and subscribe. And as always, continue to question the universe around you. Carry that white light with you. Have peace among yourselves. Love you guys. Take care. Lockdown Universe out. Peace.